Welcome back to Infinite Business Dynamics. In this video, we'll bring the key ideas together, from understanding Kanban and making work visible, to controlling WIP, looking beyond individual utilization, seeing the whole system, and improving through experimentation. The goal is simple: make work visible, limit WIP, improve flow, and ultimately improve the system.
Today we're shifting gears. We are taking those big ideas and putting them directly into action. We're going to master Kanban flow specifically for the PMP. So we're moving away from just the theory and stepping right into the messy, real-world practical application. Let's get to it.
Here's our from concept to practice. Then we'll map out your actual workflow. From there, we'll look at a real secret weapon, setting smart WIP limits.
Part 1.
We'll learn exactly why we need to stop pushing work and start pulling it. And finally, we'll wrap the whole thing up with the system-level mindset you absolutely need to succeed.
Evolution, not revolution.
You know, a lot of project managers stress out that implementing Kanban means, like, tearing down everything they've built and starting completely from scratch. But I'm here to reassure you it's an evolution, not a revolution. You absolutely do not have to destroy your current workflow to start making it better right now. To make this evolution happen, we really rely on 4 core components to transform a chaotic process into a beautifully streamlined system. It all boils down to utilizing the board, setting your WIP limits, establishing pull mechanics, and ultimately optimizing your system flow. These are the practical tools that'll literally bring order to your daily project management chaos.
Think of it as a sequential formula for success. You can really use this as your mental scaffolding for how work actually progresses. Step 1 is always to visualize your work. You have to see it to understand how it moves. Step 2 is to limit WIP, which controls your capacity. Step 3 is pull, completely changing the engine of movement. And finally, step 4 is flow, which is the ultimate goal, getting work smoothly across that finish line. Our workflow. And the key word here is actual, to reflect reality. That word actual is absolutely crucial here. We aren't mapping how we wish the workflow was designed in some perfect imaginary world. We need a map of reality, tracking how work moves from ready all the way to done. Now, every team is a little different, sure, but a typical flow might include stages like analysis, development, review, and testing before it's completely finished. The golden rule: your board must reflect the way work is actually performed by your team right now, warts and all, not some idealized textbook process designed completely separate from reality. Once we make all that invisible work visible, something pretty magical happens. We start to see the raw reality of our pacing. So when you set up your own board, I want you to step back, take a really close look at it, and ask yourself this one vital question: where is work accumulating? Now, what's really interesting is how glaringly obvious the problem becomes once it's visual. Suddenly, you might notice a massive stack of tasks just piling up in the testing phase. You could have half a dozen items jammed in there while the other stages are moving along just fine with maybe 1 or 2 items. Visualizing work instantly exposes these imbalances. That giant pile isn't just a bunch of sticky notes, it's a massive bottleneck. And that imbalance, it is literally screaming at us to investigate the flow. Which brings us to section 3. Setting smart WIP limits to control your system's capacity. So, how do we actually fix a bottleneck like the one we just talked about? Well, we need to introduce some healthy boundaries. Let's clearly define what we mean here. WIP limits, or work in progress limits, are basically constraints. They balance demand and capability by strictly restricting the maximum amount of work allowed in any given stage. Doing this dramatically reduces excessive waiting. And I really want to emphasize this. These limits exist entirely to prevent bottlenecks. They aren't just arbitrary management numbers designed to stress your team out. They are a necessary protective mechanism for your workflow. Let's look at how that actually applies in practice. Your WIP limits will often be completely different depending on the stage. You might have a limit of 2 for analysis, 3 for development, and back to 2 for review and test. WIP limits should fit your system's actual capacity naturally. It makes perfect sense that they won't necessarily be identical across every single stage. I mean, the effort and time required for heavy software development usually vastly differs from, say, a quick peer review, right? Okay, section 4. Stop pushing, start pulling. It's time to completely change the movement engine. Now that we've got boundaries in place, we need to completely shift how work actually moves. But first, a quick warning about the sheer danger of a traditional system. Imagine a typical push system. It's essentially a clogged funnel. When you just keep pushing work into a constrained system simply because there's demand for it, unfinished work just accumulates. You get more work entering, the queue goes, waiting time skyrockets, and eventually the flow just entirely suffers. Constantly shoving tasks in at the top does not mean they magically get done any faster at the bottom. It just creates chaos.
So here's the crucial point. How do we use our WIP limits to stop this funnel from clogging up? When a stage, like development, reaches its WIP limit, it acts exactly like a padlock on the whole system. There's absolutely no capacity left, period. So instead of automatically starting another item and making the pile even bigger, this padlock creates a necessary, healthy pressure. It forces the team to finish the existing work first. Simply put, you have to stop starting and start finishing.
And here's the beautiful resolution to that tension. When the team finishes an item and moves it out to the review stage, suddenly capacity becomes available in development. That newly emptied slot naturally pulls the next appropriate piece of work forward from the analysis column. WIP limits and pull mechanics work together in perfect harmony. They regulate the movement of work, ensuring nobody gets overwhelmed and work actually, finally, gets finished. Let's make this contrast incredibly clear. A push system is based purely on demand or instruction. It's like someone dropping a massive folder on your already overflowing desk and yelling, "Start this next," regardless of how slammed you already are. A pull system, on the other hand, actively waits for available capacity. It checks the board and asks, "Okay, capacity is available, what should enter next?" And this brilliantly illustrates that fundamental difference in action. Think about the push instruction as a hand forcing blocks into a box that is already completely overflowing. It's stressful and things just spill everywhere. But the pull method? It acts exactly like a magnet. When a slot opens up, the magnet just smoothly pulls the next available item in. It's just a much calmer, far more sustainable way to manage literally any project. All right, home stretch. Section 5, the system-level mindset. Maintaining continuous flow. Understanding the mechanics of the workflow is one thing, but answering system-level questions correctly on your PMP exam requires a total shift in how you think. The crucial point is that we must deliberately shift our focus away from merely starting more work. True efficiency, it's not about making sure every single individual on your team is busy 100% of the time. If they're just busy piling up work and creating a massive bottleneck, that's actually harmful to the project. Instead, Kanban demands that we shift our attention toward completing work and maintaining a really healthy, continuous flow across the entire system. This is the ultimate mindset shift you need to ace those situational questions on the exam. You must stop asking, who can start more work? Looking only at whether people are sweating under a heavy load completely ignores the reality of queues and bottlenecks. Actually, scratch that. It makes them worse. Instead, you've got to step back, look at the entire system and ask, where is work accumulating and what is preventing flow? Find where capacity is constrained and completely remove those blockers. So I'll leave you with this final thought for your own projects. Moving forward, are you going to exhaust yourself trying to keep everyone perfectly busy, or will you look at the system and focus on exactly what's preventing your flow? Welcome back to part 2 of this explainer. We're skipping the basics today and diving straight into the deep end. So if your team is currently wrestling with bottlenecks, jammed up queues, and delayed delivery, well, you're exactly where you need to be. We're going to directly tackle how to diagnose and actually restore your workflow by looking at the hard visual evidence right in front of us. Let's get to it. Picking right up where we left off in part 1, let's look at the flow paradigm. Our ultimate goal here, literally the whole reason we're analyzing this system, is to fundamentally shift our mindset. We've got to stop just managing busyness and start focusing entirely on accelerating real value delivery. See that smooth, unobstructed channel? That is the dream. That's what we're striving for. A piece of value moving steadily from start to finish, totally friction-free without getting stuck.
But, when work starts to struggle, we almost always see physical symptoms. Notice that bottleneck shape happening there? Work is accumulating into these jammed up queues. The flow is restricted. Think about your own Teams board. When you see work just piling up in one specific column, well, that's a massive red flag. But simply spotting that queue isn't enough. The absolutely vital question you have to ask yourself is, what is actually constraining the flow? We can't just treat the symptom. We have to diagnose the root cause of that restriction and figure out exactly how it's choking the rest of the system.
Now, here's where teams often make a really critical mistake.
When they see that cue, development might just relentlessly keep pushing work downstream into an already overloaded testing phase. And honestly, that's disastrous. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. The testing queue just becomes total chaos, tumbling all over itself. If testing is already drowning, shoving more work at them doesn't help. It just exacerbates the blockage. It creates this massive, unmoving traffic jam that completely paralyzes your delivery.
So here is the absolute crucial takeaway. More input does not equal more flow. Let me repeat that. More input does not equal more flow. Continuing to pour more and more activity into the upstream part of your workflow absolutely does not mean you're going to magically deliver more value downstream. Actually, it's the exact opposite. You're actively harming the system's ability to deliver anything at all. You're basically just building a larger, more stressful pile of unfinished work.
Okay, so how do we actually fix it? What's the tactical solution? Well, once you've pinpointed that central constraint, you've essentially got 4 immediate levers you can pull. First up, collaborate. Cross-functional swarming. Literally get your developers to step in and help the testers. Second, rebalance support. Physically shift your team's capacity over to that bottleneck. Third, just remove the impediments. Clear out whatever barricades are in the way. Or fourth, stop the bleeding. Reduce further accumulation by completely halting upstream input until that jam clears out. Your response has to hit the actual root cause, not just put a Band-Aid on the symptom. That is how we get back to restoring actual flow.
Now we've got to talk about the silent killers of your workflow. Take a look at this capacity gauge, specifically those slots numbered 1 through 5. See that blocked slot on the far right? That represents an item just sitting there, waiting for, say, an external approval. There's literally no active work happening on it. For all we know, the developer is off reading a novel. But, and this is a huge but, that blocked item is still unfinished, which means it's occupying a valuable work in progress, or WIP slot. It's a silent killer, completely starving your system's capacity. It's kind of like leaving your car parked right at the gas pump while you wander inside to do your grocery shopping. It totally prevents you from pulling in new, efficient work, because your system limits are just choked by idle, waiting items.
And this brings us to a really massive behavioral shift we have to make. We've got to move away from the passive, kind of defeated habit of just tracking a blocker. You know what I mean? Just throwing a blocked label on a task and shrugging your shoulders. Doing that just accepts the delay and leaves your capacity locked up. Instead, we have to adopt an active, dynamic mindset of restoring movement. You've got to do whatever it takes to get that item moving again.
To actually make that mental shift, we need a brand new diagnostic lens. Instead of the old habit of asking, hey, is this item blocked? Which basically just leaves the roadblock sitting right there in the middle of your workflow, we have to start asking, what can we do right now to restore movement? And you have real, actionable levers here. Resolve the dependency, get on a call and coordinate directly with stakeholders, escalate the issue if you need to, or rebalance the work. The point is, you aren't just a passive observer here, you're an active participant in clearing that channel. But hold on. What happens when that delay keeps repeating? When those exact same blockages show up in the exact same spot over and over again? Well, at that point, the problem isn't just a singular blocked item anymore. The problem is a systemic flaw in the workflow itself. Your system is literally screaming at you that its design is broken. And fixing a systemic flaw, that requires a much more evolutionary approach.
So, to evolve that system, you've got to rely on concrete evidence using a really specific 4-step continuous improvement loop. Step 1, investigate the flow. Dig in and understand exactly where and why this delay keeps happening. Step 2, try a small, contained change. Please don't try to rewrite your entire system overnight. Step 3, observe the results of that tiny change. Did the flow actually improve? And finally, step 4, adapt based on what the evidence tells you. Evolving a workflow isn't guesswork. It requires this very careful, almost scientific approach.
Now, we have to be incredibly careful here, because this brings us to the ultimate core fallacy of flow. If your primary question is always, is everyone busy? You're going to end up with a tangled, blocked up mess where every single square inch of capacity is utilized, but absolutely nothing is actually moving. Think about it. Keeping every person at 100% utilization does not guarantee fast or efficient performance. Your people can be fully utilized, working at max capacity, while the actual valuable work is just sitting there rotting in a queue. We have to shift our focus to ask, is valuable work actually moving toward done? All right, let's put this into practice with a high-stakes, real-world scenario. You might see this on a PMP exam, or let's be real, right on your desk on a random Tuesday afternoon. Here's the setup. Your WIP limits are completely maxed out.
Your testing team is severely overloaded and totally stressed. Out of nowhere, a super important stakeholder knocks on your door and aggressively demands that new work be started immediately. What is your very first move? Seriously, take a second and think about what you do.
Okay, here is the correct action. Automatically just pushing that new request into the system, that leads straight to a massive system failure, totally spilling over the physical constraints of your team. The correct professional path looks like this. First, assess the actual urgency and priority of the request. Second, examine your current WIP and capacity limits. And third, fiercely protect your flow. You do not bypass your WIP limits just because a stakeholder is being loud. You have to protect the flow above all else, because at the end of the day, a crashed system delivers absolutely nothing to anyone.
When we pull every single one of these diagnostic pieces together, we get this beautifully unified, healthy engine. What we're looking at is a working Kanban system in action. The workflow is completely visible. On the input side, the WIP is strictly limited by structural gates. Work is being pulled dynamically through the system only when the capacity actually exists to handle it. It's almost like a vacuum effect pulling the work forward. Your constraints in the middle are being actively managed. And the ultimate payoff? That smooth, continuous delivery of value straight to the done state on the other side.
And that brings us to a perfect summary of everything we've covered in this explainer. Really mastering the flow comes down to 4 main pillars. You've got to deliberately design the workflow, rigorously control your work in progress, actively apply the principle of pull rather than push, and vigorously respond to any constraints. You should now have a really solid grasp of how WIP, pull, and flow all interact to build a healthy system.
Learning reinforcement.
If you want a team to produce as much as possible, it makes sense to ensure everyone is working at 100% capacity. If nobody is idle, the system must be operating at peak efficiency, right? Not exactly. This graphic illustrates the core fallacy of flow. Keeping everyone busy starting new tasks creates catastrophic gridlock. When everyone is fully utilized, work piles up. As seen on the right, deliverables only move towards done when the system has space to breathe. This is the central paradox of knowledge work. Optimizing a system to make sure every single person is always busy actively degrades the overall delivery speed of the team. Managing a team by optimizing for their busyness is an illusion. True management requires shifting the focus away from starting work and toward finishing it. We see this happen all the time. A stakeholder requests urgent new work, and a project manager, wanting to prove their responsiveness, immediately tells the team to start. This is a push system. Work is triggered purely by external demand or instructions, completely ignoring the current capacity of the team. When you push work into an already constrained stage, like testing, the tasks pile up. They bulge and physically jam the track. Increasing activity and input upstream does absolutely nothing to increase delivery downstream. Once that jam occurs, secondary consequences take hold. Multitasking rapidly increases, context switching degrades quality, and the cycle time for every single item in the pipeline balloons. Ultimately, this push approach frustrates everyone involved. The execution team is overwhelmed, and the stakeholder receives nothing on time. This makes gridlock a mathematical certainty rather than a failure of work ethic. Any system operating on push mechanics will eventually choke on its own inputs. This is a Kanban board. It maps the path work takes from ready to done, providing a physical representation of the system's capacity. But simply visualizing the columns is only the first step. To stop gridlock, the system requires a rigid mechanical governor. These numerical circles are work in progress, or WIP, limits. They represent the literal physical capacity of the system at each specific stage. These limits must reflect the reality of the team. By balancing demand with actual capability, they reduce the time work spends waiting in line. The rule of WIP is ironclad. When a column is full, the no capacity padlock engages. No new work is allowed to enter. Instead of automatically starting another item, the system creates intense pressure to finish the work that is already in progress. Enforcing these WIP limits fundamentally reverses the trigger for starting new tasks. In a pull system, work only ever advances when a downstream stage completes a task. Look at what is finished in development and moves to review. It creates a glowing available capacity slot. That newly empty slot acts like a vacuum, pulling the next highest priority item from the upstream stage. This changes the trigger. On the left, work is pushed by demand. On the right, it is pulled by available capacity. The team is no longer waiting for external instructions on what to start. They are waiting for available system capacity to dictate movement. This chain reaction continuously balances the system's intake with its actual output capability. Pull mechanics engineer a self-regulating workflow, immunizing the project against the accumulation of unfinished tasks. Even in a pull system, we must manage operational reality. When cards pile up in a column like test, work stops moving. The board acts as a diagnostic engine. This visual imbalance identifies the exact location of the system's constraint. We also have to watch for starved capacity caused by blocked work, items waiting on external approvals or dependencies. Even if no active labor is happening on a blocked item, it still consumes a WIP slot. It prevents new, efficient work from flowing in. Traditionally, managers just label an item as blocked and move on. But flow management requires a different question. What can we do to restore movement? Simply tracking a blocker is a failure. Because capacity is locked, the team must swarm the problem to restore movement. When a major constraint is identified, a team must deploy tactical responses, collaborate, rebalance support, and remove physical impediments. The most critical response is halting upstream input. Do not feed the bottleneck while the team swarms to clear it. If the same delay appears repeatedly in the same column, you have to look at the system itself through a continuous loop of investigation and adaptation. A recurring constraint is not an issue with a single employee. It is a structural flaw in the workflow design that requires evidence-based changes. A flow system is never truly finished. It is a living diagnostic tool that forces management to evolve based on physical evidence of friction. The objective is a system where the workflow is visible, WIP is strictly controlled, and work is pulled only by capacity. Reaching this state requires abandoning the urge to keep every individual constantly busy. This is the difference between optimizing for resource utilization, where people are overwhelmed, and optimizing for a gear-driven workflow. Stop asking who can start more work, and start asking where is work accumulating and what is preventing flow. The focus must be the delivery of value. Work has zero value until it crosses the finish line, so a manager must protect the flow above all else.